My friends, in one of the spiritual books that I've been reading lately, written by Father Walter Chiswick, who was a Jesuit in the early to mid-1900s and who eventually died just about 20 years back, served much of his time in his priesthood actually in Siberia, spending time in many of the labor camps while he was there trying to evangelize the people after World War II. There are many times when he talks about his struggles in this book that he writes from In Russia with God. And during some of the moments that were most difficult, he writes that he goes back to this one memory that he had with his father when he was young. And Father Chiswick says this: "I remember the day I went to a Boy Scout outing in another town and spent the money that my father had given me at an amusement park near the camping grounds. I had no money for the train fare home. Instead, I hitched a ride by hanging on to the outside of one of the boxcars. I was nearly killed against the wall of a tunnel that we passed through, and I arrived home back in Shenandoah about 1 a.m., very cold, very wet, and very tired, and very scared. My father, worried, was still waiting up for me. He lit a fire in the kitchen stove, and then, without waking my mother, he cooked a meal for me with his own hands, saw me safely to bed. And then many years later in the Siberian prison camps, it was that episode above all others that I remembered about my loving father and that I gave thanks for." The power of gratitude resurfaces times that we have been blessed. It helps us to remember, it helps us to recall. In the first reading, it is obvious that Naaman wants to be grateful for everything that Elisha had provided for him, so much so that he carries with him 2 mule loads of dirt. He carries with him the physical remains of the place so that his remembrance could be aided. And then, of course, in the gospel, we see in many ways the same thing. Immediately seeing that his skin was changed, it did not matter that he was a foreigner. It didn't matter anything at all. His relation to Christ, he had been provided for. He knows that he was given something that he himself could not supply. And the leper, who was a Samaritan, comes to the feet of Christ. In fact, the verb that's used by Luke is to return. It is possible as Catholics, and in fact, it's needed. We must return to what we carry in our minds or what we have around us in the family of God that resurfaces what God has already provided so that we go back to the loving Father when we could wander off somewhere else.